Nimona is a graphic novel written and illustrated by N.D. Stevenson. The story opens when the title character signs on as the sidekick to supervillain Ballister Blackheart. Nimona as a story is difficult to pitch to someone. It's fantasy, but with death rays and televisions. It's sci-fi, but with dragons and superhero knights. Plenty of stories don't fit neatly into such categories, but with Nimona, this tension between sci-fi and fantasy, science and magic, reality and myth lies at its thematic heart. Ballister is a villain, but more than anything, he's a scientist. He believes in rules, in a rational, ordered world. He asks of Nimona at one point, "How does your shapeshifting work? It doesn't make any sense." To which she insists, "It's magic. Can't you just accept it and move on?" He can't. When Nimona and Ballister discover that the government is working with dangerous substances that could endanger the populace, the duo tries to warn people. After that fails, Ballister engineers a toxin which should mimic the effects of the poison without hurting anyone. The hope is to make the threat seem real, to fuel distrust in the institution that runs this society. Soon enough, citizens of the kingdom begin to come down with a mysterious illness, one which is, in reality, not random, but engineered. It's a distinctly pre-COVID plotline, uncomfortably resonant with contemporary right-wing conspiracy theories. In context, though, it's interesting that Ballister's methods involve not healing a real sickness, but manufacturing his own. In a certain light, he's doing the same thing as the institution he claims to oppose. Later, Ballister and Nimona meet another scientist named Meredith Blitzmeyer, who shows them her invention, a way of harnessing what she calls anomalous energy, which, she theorizes, is also the power source behind all magic. The device, when powered on, has an unexpected effect. It temporarily traps Nimona in whatever form she's in. Despite the fact that Blitzmeyer describes her work as synthesizing magic and science, her device seems to me more like it is overwriting magic. Ideologically, in insisting that it can be understood scientifically in the first place, as well as literally, shutting down the shapeshifter's magic. Science, here, is a tool with genuine power, one that is easily turned to violence against things which do not conform to its laws. Nimona would be the first to tell you, though, that she is not an innocent victim. We don't get to know whether her insistence in her own evil is based on real harm she's done in her past, or if it's simple self-loathing. And I'm not sure it matters. Her feelings about the possibility of her own monstrousness are real. Her magic ensures that they are even made physical. Nimona the comic is, among other things, about what it means to be capable of hurting someone else, to be defined by the hurt you can do to others. It's difficult not to read in Stevenson's autobiographical work here. He writes at one point of Nimona, "I didn't know what I was doing when I first started drawing the comic over a decade ago. I just knew that my emotions were too big for my body, and I had to put them somewhere. There was no pushing them down. One way or another, they came boiling up. A child screaming to be heard, or a monster that found it a little too easy to draw blood." Nimona is a character who defies categorization in mundane ways, too, fluttering between feminine and masculine and inhuman bodies. There's something inherently queer about shapeshifters, the blurring of boxes their existence necessitates. Sometimes people talk about this in a reductive way, accepting a character's ability to change genders only because they can change bodies. Cisnormativity with a new coat of paint. Nevertheless, it is true that such complete control over one's appearance is a very trans fantasy. N.D. Stevenson's later work, She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, provides one of the more overt examples of the non-binary shapeshifter in media. Certainly, there are shades of Nimona in Double Trouble, and vice versa. But where they differ is that the world of She-Ra is one of diversity and possibility. No one ever questions why or how Double Trouble can shapeshift, or why they're a lizard person. Despite them being the one who actually uses they-them pronouns, it's Nimona who feels more queer, in a political sense, whose understanding of herself is at odds with the society she lives in. When Ballister asks about her past, Nimona lies. She spins up a story about a witch granting magic powers, about loving parents murdered by raiders. Other explanations are suggested throughout the comic. There are legends, we learn, of an ancient beast that can shift shapes the way she can. Maybe she is that beast, or maybe it's not even real. Maybe, as Ballister convinces himself at one point, she's an experiment, engineered in a lab for some unknown purpose. The world is vast, and this story is small. We may never know the full truth of the matter. We do eventually, though, get some answers in flashback. Nimona was a normal kid. Probably. She transformed one day to save her village from raiders, and her parents brought her to people to study her, to find out what had become of their child, if she really was their child. The people holding her captive insist that she, a monster, has replaced the real child Nimona. The idea isn't disproved. In the introduction to a book on adaptation studies, academic Robert Stam points out that one, quote, source of hostility to adaptation is the charge of parasitism. Adaptations are seen as parasitical on literature. They burrow into the body of the source text and steal its vitality. How often have journalistic reviews claimed that an adaptation has drained the life of the original? The events of the comic eventually come to a head. The institution captures Nimona, but they make the mistake of taking a sample from her body to study. Ballister isn't there to hear it, but we do get the answers he was looking for about how Nimona's powers work. As it turns out, just a few cells are enough for her to reconstitute herself from, and soon she is split in two, one body outside the prison cell and another still trapped within. Outside, she is a dragon on a rampage. Inside, she's a weak, scared kid. Ballister sees the dragon and tries to go to her. Ambrosius has to stop him. Ambrosius, his arch-nemesis, his old friend, his ex-something. The director of the institution comments at one point that, "I know what the nature of your relationship was." But no one ever comes out and says it. The dynamic between the two of them is a study in subtext, the romantic element clear as day, but always unspoken. Whatever they used to be, their relationship was changed forever the day Ballister was ousted from the institution. Now, he and Ambrosius have had years to let the feelings between them simmer. The pain is deep, but so is the love and trust that made the betrayal so hurtful in the first place. Nimona has no such history to tie her down, or to prop her up. She is alone. His trust in her is faltering, but he refuses to give up on Nimona. Ballister believes he can save her, because he understands that the monster and the scared little kid are not one and the same. Armed with Dr. Blitzmeyer's device to neutralize the dragon's powers, he and Ambrosius return to the institution. Things don't go according to plan. He rescues child Nimona from where she's being kept hostage, but when she sees he's brought the device, that he felt the need to contain the other part of her, she sides with the dragon. Still, in the end, Ballister defeats the monster, saves the kingdom. "You saved a lot of people," Blitzmeyer tells him afterward. "But I couldn't save her." The comic ends with an epilogue, one with narration. Various scenes throughout the graphic novel implicitly placed us in one point of view or another, but this is the only time a character addresses the audience directly. Nimona is gone. Ballister is left alone with his thoughts. He reflects, "I don't know where Nimona is now. I haven't seen her since. At least, I don't think I have. I suppose I wouldn't know. I don't know if I'll ever see her again. It's probably for the best. Of course, I still wonder. About every stranger who gives me a knowing look. About every cat who watches me too closely. I can only hope I reached her in some small way. I can only hope that if she does come back, she'll know me for who I am. A friend." It's an ambiguous, bittersweet ending. Despite the trappings, Nimona is not a story about heroes triumphing over evil. Maybe its world is not that kind of world. Maybe its kingdom is not that kind of kingdom.
Oh, maybe it's not the end of the story.
Nimona is an animated film directed by Nick Bruno and Troy Quain. The story opens with Nimona's narration, though first-time viewers won't know it as such. She's playing the part of an omniscient narrator, until, that is, she yanks the opening monologue off course with her own thesis, an alternate interpretation of this society's founding myth.
Some of us don't get the happily ever after we're looking for. 'Cause it ain't that kind of kingdom.
Soon enough, she signs on as the sidekick to alleged villain Ballister Boldheart. When I heard a Nimona adaptation was in the works, I was skeptical. Partially because the company attached to it was the studio best known for the Ice Age movies, which do not seem like a great fit for the angsty queer young adult story. But also because, didn't that already exist? wasn't that She-Ra? So many of the pieces that made up Nimona carry through into Stevenson's television work. The science fantasy aesthetics, but also the character dynamics. Catra is Nimona and Ballister both, the feral girl and the lovelorn villain. What was left to adapt from Nimona that wouldn't feel like a retread? More likely, I thought, the film would be an adaptation in name only. Nimona the movie wears its themes on its sleeve in ways plenty of people have already discussed. It's a story about villainization and bigotry and fighting for your right to exist. Catra's ability to be good was often in question, but her personhood never was. It's difficult not to read in Stevenson's autobiographical work here, despite his limited involvement. The film's narrative is an incredibly trans one. I'd almost go so far as to call it particularly transmasculine. The specific brand of normalcy Nimona refuses, with teeth and claws and punk music, is one bound up in the constructed purity and innocence of white girlhood. Perhaps as important as the move from graphic novel to film is the move from a YA to a children's audience. Subtext is pulled to the surface. When Nimona takes the form of a small child, she's not an innocent in need of protecting, but a peer, a kid just like you. And the tone is lighter. The characters struggle and face conflict, but one of the things that stands out for me about this movie is how joyful it is, how delighted by its own existence. And yet throughout, I found myself struck by a sense that Nimona knew the story she was in as well as I did. She knows the script as provided to us by the comic, even when the world she moves through doesn't quite match. She'll become Ballister's sidekick even though he isn't expecting one. She'll end the story in smoke and flame, alone again. She knows how this goes. The second way that Nimona and Double Trouble differ is that the latter is an unambiguous villain. The inherent transness of their shapeshifting is complicated by the fact that it is more than anything a weapon they wield, a tool to foster paranoia among the protagonists. Double Trouble fits neatly into the history of shapeshifters in science fiction, the evil that walks among us unseen.
It could be anyone. Your spouse, your child, your best friend, the person sitting next to you. None of us are safe.
She-Ra is not alone in playing this beat straight. And while I won't say it's impossible to tell a body snatcher story that's left-leaning in its politics, many deployments of the trope continue to take on a very particular tone. Secret Invasion is a recent textbook example. I mean, the same alien species who act as the villain in Secret Invasion were, back in Captain Marvel, explicitly framed as refugees seeking a new home. There's a Doctor Who episode from the 2010s that pulls that exact same move, recontextualizing its alien shapeshifters as immigrants before deciding they're a danger anyway. The effect is that these shows say, yes, maybe there are some good aliens, but aliens are dangerous, and you should be scared of them. They want to comment on how this trope relies on paranoia and othering, but then get swept up in its logic anyway, because isn't it scary to not be able to trust anyone? They refuse to commit to the premise that maybe it's okay for someone not to be who you thought they were, if that means being themselves. It's hard to ignore, though, that the examples I've just listed aren't fear-mongering about some undefined other. They are both stories about refugees, and, implicitly, about terrorists. To bring this back around to Nimona, there is, of course, this.
Remember, if you see something, slay something.
Which is a reference to the slogan adopted by parts of the US government in the wake of 9/11. I'm not saying this is an intentional connection on the part of the filmmakers, so much as that it's telling in and of itself that when they wanted to depict a culture of surveillance, that's what they reached for. So much of state-sanctioned paranoia in the 21st century United States is informed by post-9/11 anti-terrorism rhetoric that, of course, it's what they reached for. To talk about this paranoia is to talk about racism and Islamophobia, so it's all the more relevant given that Ballister here is voiced by a Pakistani British actor. In the comic, all of the leads are white. Changing this allows for a more intersectional examination of the movie's themes of marginalization. When Ballister asks about her past, Nimona refuses to answer. So too does the movie. Oh sure, there is an extended flashback sequence, but the questions we'd put so much weight on. What is she? Where did she come from? How did she get these powers? Remain unanswered. Because those things aren't what matter. We already know who she is. She's Nimona. What we do learn about is the people for whom that explanation wasn't enough. We see her carefree and hopeful at the dawning of the kingdom. The story of this world is the story of Nimona. Something exists beyond those walls, but it's hard to imagine what it could be. The world is small, or the story is large. Robert Stam writes that critique focused on whether film adaptations are faithful to their source material, quote, relies on essentialist arguments in relation to both media. First, it assumes that a novel contains an extractable essence, a kind of heart of the artichoke hidden underneath the surface details of style. Hidden within War and Peace, there is an originary core, a kernel of meaning and events which can be delivered by an adaptation. But in fact, there is no transferable core. A single novelistic text comprises a series of verbal signals that can trigger a plethora of possible readings. An open structure, constantly reworked and reinterpreted by a boundless context. The text feeds on and is fed into infinitely permutating intertext, seen through ever-shifting grids of interpretation. In other words, there is no single truth hiding underneath, no real body beyond the shifting forms. There's just Nimona. Ballister's trust in her falters when Ambrosius tells him a different story of her past. Ambrosius, who loves him. From that first moment, it's clear as day what the nature of their feelings for one another is. Whatever they used to be, their relationship was changed forever the day Ballister was ousted from the Institute. Now, he and Ambrosius have had no time at all to process what happened between them. The betrayal is raw, an open wound that binds them to one another. Nimona had someone she felt that way about, once upon a time. Her history ties her down, despite all her attempts to outrun it. Toward the end, that pain is what transforms her into a dragon on a rampage, a monster stalking the city in search of her revenge, or her own immolation. Maybe that's all she was ever after. Ballister is the only one who can save her, because he understands that the monster and the scared little kid are one and the same. How could he ever have thought otherwise? He goes to her. Nimona dies anyway, saves the kingdom. Not a dragon, but a phoenix burning. The story repeating. He takes over her role as narrator. Nimona is gone, Ballister is left alone with his thoughts. But then, she isn't. She returns, and his reaction says it all. His sheer delight. It has been almost a decade since Nimona first burned herself down and left her life with Ballister behind. And when she did come back, she knew him for who he was, a friend.